excited about. There we go. Now we're recording. But I'm very excited to start this conversation. Again, we're here for the statewide transfer groups and councils discussion. We'll first have a little bit of a presentation between myself, Kristen, and then Tracy, and we'll open up for a big, hopefully a big open conversation. Quick introductions. My name is John Leach. I oversee transfer credit and degree auditing here at UC Davis, part of the UC system. I've been here at UC Davis since 2018. I worked at UNC Charlotte and CU Denver. And so it's been interesting moving around, but I also started the University of California Transfer Credit Group, statewide group that primarily focuses on processing transfer credit itself.
All right. Well, hi, everybody. I'm Kristen Schmigelski, and I am currently the Dean of Enrollment Management at Parkland College, which is a community college in East Central Illinois. I've been here for 3 years. And prior to this, I was at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, which is really just across town from where I am now, where I took on I was in charge of transfer recruitment, articulation, and pretty much all things transfer related. So kind of the stuff I'll be talking about today, two main groups that I've been heavily involved with. One, which is a statewide kind of transfer coordinator group, and another that is co-chairing Illinois ACAC transfer group, but we'll get to that in a bit.
Hello, I am Tracy Jamison. I'm Director of Articulation and Enrollment Services at the University System of Maryland. I've been within the system for, next week, it'll be a total of 32 years. At one point, I oversaw transfer admission at the University of Maryland College Park, and I oversaw admission with the University of Maryland School of Nursing. And my perspective will come from not just a four-year perspective, but of course from the collaboration at a statewide level when you have multiple segments and various interests that need to collaborate on transfer areas and interests. So that will be my area of perspective.
Thank you, Kristen and Tracy. And yeah, I want to repeat again, please put in questions in the chat throughout the time. We are going to have a Q&A at the end, which leads me to my next slide, actually. So let me back up a quick second. So I'm going to start us off by talking about the establishment of a group for those out there who are kind of curious and thinking of how perhaps some others like myself have done it, hopefully give a couple of good tips along the way. But really excited to hear more from Kristen and Tracy at the institutional and system-wide perspectives and how to leverage these groups and what the successes you've heard. I'm going to use my group as a little bit of an example case, but we are fairly new, about 6 or so months. So it's gonna be really great to have Kristen and Tracy's perspective. And again, have a Q&A at the end. So please, any and all questions or just open discussion, really looking forward to that part. I'm gonna make my part a little bit quick as best I can. But again, talking about establishing a group, injecting some of my experiences with this UC-wide system group for transfer credit. So anytime thinking about anything that we do, a lot of times project development and change management and project management is a really great starting point. So the basics of identifying, defining, and implementation are really great steps to at least get things started. And it starts really simple too, right? I think we all, especially if you're attending today, you're thinking of, well, there's something that I don't have. There's not a resource out there for X, Y, or Z. It could be articulation agreements. It could be the student experience through the transfer work, avenues and process flows through either internally of a system or across the states, whatever that may be. And so once you have those kind of needs defined and figured out from your own individual perspective, you can start taking the next step, thinking about the internal and external stakeholders. My suggestion here is to really kind of keep it small at first. Think of who the core key stakeholders are. Because starting off with a large group is quite unwieldy, I think, at times. And then it's kind of like a check to yourself. Start trying to figure out, are there resources, are there groups, are there entities out there that are already doing this work in some kind of manner? One example to think about that is not always at the forefront of our minds at some cases is, for example, statewide restrictions or statewide initiatives. For example, California, out here in California, We have a really robust articulation process and structure. And there we have to make sure that we're not stepping on certain toes and that we understand where what we're trying to accomplish and not going again against the grain, so to speak, in some areas. But very much simply, next is defining your purpose. Now, the purpose should more or less come from your needs, right? You should take those individual needs that you initially draw out and configure yourself, work with that initial group that you have and start drawing out really what is it you all are trying to get at. And I think what's most important here is drawing out that scope. Defining that scope is pretty critical. I mean, nothing has to be too rigid, right? You want to be flexible, which I'll talk about here in a second. But it's really critical to understand the boundaries, setting yourselves up for those boundaries to help yourselves for today and tomorrow to understand what you're all doing. There is such thing as scope creep, right? So you want to make sure that you have a defined set, so things don't keep piling on, and before you know it, you've got 100 people in a group talking about 100 different things, and then you're not using your time efficiently or effectively. If you want to get down to the objective level, that's totally great. But that typically can kind of change depending on month even. So really focusing on that purpose and that scope, I think, is so critical to be able to from that. And again, using my group as an example, I identified the needs and I worked with the group initially as far as we don't have a resource for transfer credit processing. There's a lot of overlap with evaluation on that, but there's already entities out there for admittance purposes and evaluation purposes. And some of the UCs and many of you out there, evaluation and processing is actually the same thing. So there's a lot of overlap. We still didn't have that entity, that network of resources to help really standardize a lot of practices and to identify opportunities at the UC level, at the system level, and to share ideas between the individual institutions, kind of the difficult areas that we're each facing, which oftentimes can be the same exact thing. So once you have your scope figured out and you have that core group of folks, then you want to be working with those core group of folks further and trying to identify what are the other additional stakeholders. After you've defined your scope, you are going to start thinking about, okay, well, we got to be thinking about what's the next level of folks that we want to include, whether on a consistent basis or intermittently so. And it's very simply setting up your base rules, setting up your structure. How often are you meeting? For how long are you meeting? How are you going to be communicating? What are the expectations with all of this? And it sounds very basic, but talking through that is really nice to have that set expectation with everybody on board, because we're all busy. We're having another meeting is not the most fun thing in the world. So setting expectations early on is really helpful. To finish things off really quickly, with the keys to the future, engagement. As much as you can, try to work, and don't do it all yourself, right? You're one person, but as much as you can, work with the group to figure out ways that the things that are discussed, the topics that you're approaching, are always applicable to everybody involved, right? Even when there are meetings or topics at hand that really don't directly pertain to somebody, you still want them to be participating, because they can add something there. Just being there is such a critical piece of group management, right, and group participation. And then with evolution and flexibility, we all know higher in education, we are evolving sometimes slower than we would like, and in other cases, faster than we would like. But understanding that scope and everything you built up to this point can and should and will change. And so being flexible and being mindful of that is really beneficial. But still, again, trying to make sure that your core focus, that your core purpose is not altering, right? But everything else is being flexible to meet the needs of your students, the students from community colleges or your partner institutions, wherever, but everybody along that workflow, right? I think that's what's so critical at the end of this, which I guess is leading kind of somewhat into my tips, is that even though you might be thinking about your individual group, you want to be thinking always for the students, as we all do, thinking about students first throughout their entire process flow, right? Whether if you're just focusing on transfer credit for like my group is, or if you're focusing on the longevity of it all, it doesn't matter. We all need to be thinking about students' perspective first, and how can we enhance their experience and letting them, enjoy their college experience at the end of the day. But I do have a couple of tips that I learned. I just harped a little bit on engagement. Something that I did with our group is I created a Google, just a very simple Google form. And I asked, hey, everybody, what is your top like 3 or something topics of interest? What do you really want to get out of this group as we were forming it? And so I gathered all that up. I put them into more generalized topics, and then we voted on them. And with that voting came out, a list. And that turned into kind of our prioritization of what we were discussing those preceding months of conversations. Very simple, it does take a little bit of time, but it's really great to make sure that everybody's perspective is taken into consideration. Also, I constructed a listserv for the group. Again, very simple tool, but so powerful. If you haven't made a listserv before, just talk with your IT staff. That hopefully can help you with that. If not, I think there's some other options out there that are pretty simple to set up one up. But again, simple tool, but keeping that communication line open. It also helps with things like your other staff, maybe not the core staff that participates in there, but hey, I got this one quick question. Let me see what everybody else thinks about this. Great tool to use. Lastly, we live in the world of, due to the pandemic, of everything online, but continue to use those things like Google Drive or Box, some sort of centralized entity to be able to share documents and files, in addition to, again, meetings and conversations along those lines. So that was a very quick run through of this. Again, pretty basic information, but it's really important to really focus on all these individual steps and trying to not skip anything. Because for example, if you add too many people in the beginning, good luck on trying to keep that scope narrow, right? And so try to take your time, try to think thorough, and work with your group as much as you possibly can. Teamwork does make, what's the saying? Teamwork makes dream work, whatever that is. And so yeah, so I'm excited to hear about next with Kristen, more on the institutional focus and hearing more of those concrete hands-on benefits and what came from it. Kristen.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, as I mentioned in my intro, there's 2 main groups that I'm going to highlight. One it's longstanding, and then another one that's relatively new. So I'll go and start with the first one that's been longstanding for a while. And that's simply just our transfer coordinator statewide group. So in the state of Illinois, we have a group that meets typically about twice a year. So it's usually once in November and once in April. Where people from all around the state that are involved in transfer come together to meet. And it's a really simple idea, simple concept, but the benefits of it are really great. And just having that collaboration, that coordination, among institutions. So I think it just started with the idea that we need to work together in the transfer world, and we need to, hear each other and understand what's going on different campuses, whether it's at a 2-year or 4-year, public or private. So by doing that, getting together and having these meetings to discuss issues, answer questions is really the way to go. In the state of Illinois, we have something called the Illinois Articulation Initiative, or IAI as we refer to it. And it's basically a statewide transfer agreement that lower division general education courses are guaranteed transfer at participating institutions within the state, which is more than 100. So it's a lot of conversation at these meetings is surrounded around, changes to IAI. I mean, as you know, things are always changing, courses are changing, meeting different requirements. So a lot of part of the reason, this group gets together is also because we have this great articulation initiative within our state that really helps our transfer students from one institution to the next. We also, as a participant wise, like I said, it's anybody from a 2-year, 4-year public or private institution. It's really the people who maybe are deemed the transfer coordinator at their campus. Although we understand that sometimes, the transfer coordinator might be more of a recruitment focused person, whereas a lot of what we talk about is articulation driven. Kind of getting down to the nitty gritty of transfer is what's discussed. And so it just kind of depends on the structure of the institution. But basically we ask that somebody, a designated person from the institution go to these meetings, and it could be more than one person as well. Again, it just depends on the structure. So And they have been in person all this last year. Of course, they moved to virtual. So it'll be interesting to see, what participation looks like if people typically are able to attend things virtually a little bit, more, a little easier. So they don't have such a time constraint. But as I said, even when we meet in person, it's an essential part of our state that's really easy for people to get to. Usually doesn't involve an overnight stay. And we make the agenda like starting around 10 a.m. and usually are done by about 2 p.m. So you usually can fit it within your day. Agenda wise and what we talk about. So it will be kind of standing updates starting with the Illinois Board of Higher Education. So a designated person will come and do updates from there, from the Illinois Community College Board. So they'll have some standing updates, transferology updates, as well as those II updates. So there's usually about 4 standing agenda items that we like to discuss. It seems lately, a lot of what's talked about is proposed legislation that's out there. So sometimes the meeting time is spent thinking, if this passes or this is what's going on, how will our institutions deal with that? Or in some cases, it's been, let's write a letter on behalf of the transfer coordinator group and say why this is not a good idea, or maybe propose some changes and offer up some suggestions there too. So, but it also can just be general updates from institutions. If there's anything major that has changed in the transfer realm at that school, they have that opportunity. And then of course, networking is probably the most beneficial thing that comes from it, because you see one another. It's so important to, if you have a question, at least you have a face with a name. And even if that's not the person who is going to handle your question, they at least can point you in the right direction. So that's always nice. We also have a listserv as well, which I think most organizations or, things like this have that. So if there's ever any questions that you want to get out there, hey, how are you, how's your institution dealing with, some new legislation is a good example. It allows people an opportunity to talk to one another. Also post jobs. So, we always want to make sure people are growing professionally. And so we'll post jobs that are open on our campus and hopes to recruit from the group as well. So it becomes like one big, transfer family essentially, because you really get to know one another. On a professional level, but also a personal level, and just having that contact. As far as how it's evolved, I think there has been more involvement. I feel like transfer in general just has, look at, ACRO and having the transfer summit and the transfer, centered themed conferences and things like that. So in recent years, it's just, picked up more, I think, attention. So we'll tend to see, new faces in the group. Maybe if there's a new director, for example, on a campus, they may want to go ahead and, and join, just so they can see what's talked about and who all is there as well. So I think participation, it's not always the same people. There are always new people that join in and, want to just hear what we're talking about. And then it also just allows for more, transparency in the process. So it's not like we're all siloed. We know what's going on at one another's institutions. And so that way we can just better serve students, I feel like. And that it's more like we're in it together as opposed to working against one another. And I see a quick question in the chat. Yeah, so community colleges and four-year institutions participate in this group. So both are invited as well. So that's what I have about the statewide group. So next I'll move on to our relatively newer group. So it's our Illinois ACAC Transfer Advisory Group. And so how this really started was our ICAC in Illinois, it's primarily been focused on freshman recruitment, first year student recruitment and things like that. So transfer folks would go to the ICAC conference and, you would get a little bit here and there from it. Bits and pieces, or maybe things that were presented on that you could, put a transfer spin on, but there really wasn't a transfer track at the conference or a lot of transfer themed presentations. And a lot of that has now since changed. And part of the reason it's changed is because of the growth of our transfer advisory group. So it was in about 2015, there was an ad hoc, just a special interest group created for anybody interested in transfer. So again, it's probably a lot of the similar, transfer coordinator type person on each campus. Anybody who is interested could join. High school counselors, in the beginning we had very few high school counselors participating, but that participation has grown because that's such an important part in planning ahead and helping students, meet their future goals. And so it was just kind of a very loose, let's meet to talk for about 2 years. And then in 2017, it became an official group recognized by IACAC, has budget lines tied to it and can host events and things like that. So really the structure of that group, it's led by 3 co-chairs and you're on it for 3 years. So I am going into my last year as a co-chair on this group. And we each kind of have our own area that we oversee, which is really nice because then every year you're doing something a little bit different under the transfer advisory group. We do host events. Our largest event is called the Transfer Summit, which is, this is the Transfer Summit as well. So it's a very general term, but we do host our own Transfer Summit once a year. And that's where it's just an opportunity to have sort of like a mini conference. It's usually about 3 different time blocks with 3 sessions. So about 9 total presentations, just a 1 day. There is a cost associated with it, but it's relatively low. It's about $40, and lunches and breakfast and lunch is usually included. So again, we try and make it so there's not a lot of overnight stay, heavy travel for people, and you can make it a day trip if you want to. Not necessarily an event, but something else that we're really happy to provide through this group is transfer scholarships. So, and again, in the beginning, and this has definitely evolved, is we were able to offer just 2 transfer scholarships, 2 for spring transfers and 2 for fall. And now we've been able to grow that to 5. So we have 5 scholarships for spring and 5 for fall. And we've been able to up it to about $1,000 a piece. So we're proud that, the group has been able to advocate to have that available for transfer students. And then we also host transfer just networking sessions, and that's a relatively new thing that we've been doing, but just kind of like, let's get a topic and get a group together and just discuss, what we want, and then also use it for some networking time as well. So as far as best practices are concerned with a new group, be creative, and I say show your data. So a good example of that is the transfer scholarship that I just talked about, where, we were getting so many applications for these scholarships that it was almost just like impossible to really separate out who the 2 winners would be, because everybody was deserving, but really everybody, had very high GPA, a lot of involvement in leadership. And so we saw the need to offer more. So we went to the board and asked if we could extend that instead of 2, if we could move to 5 and actually up the how much we were giving per scholarship. And that was approved. So this last year was the first year we were able to do that. So we're really happy with that, but it was all within the data and showing how applications had increased over the course of time. Spread the word, so you really grow your own. So especially when it comes to like who the next co-chair will be, so start talking to people early in the group, because you definitely want to, I think it's easy in the beginning to have a lot of momentum, but then it kind of fizzles out maybe after a while. So you want to just kind of keep it interesting and just figure out early on maybe who the next leaders will be of the group, so you can foster that and see that through. And then, have your own recruitment events for your group. So we do try and have a breakfast, which is actually in coordination with that previous group I was talking about, where basically what we're trying to do is recruit people to join our transfer advisory group. Because again, we always want to make sure that we have that involvement and then it doesn't fizzle out, and we love to see new faces as well. And it is the makeup is very interesting. It's everybody. So community colleges, 4-year schools, public, private, and then our high school counselor participation has grown. And really the next kind of group we're going to try and tap into is also maybe some dual credit, dual enrollment focused people, since again, transfer starts early and that can be part of it as well. So so we're excited to see where it leads.
Kristen, it looks like there's a question from Kelly. Are the scholarships for in-state students only?
They just have to be members of, they have to be transferring to a member institution of IACAC. So no. Anything else? All right, well, thank you.
My turn. Excuse me. Just before I move into my area specific, I kind of wanted to loop back to a couple of things that both John and Kristen said, just to sort of pull in the different perspective and scope that I'll come from Maryland. And we are a teeny tiny state, but we put a whole lot of time and attention into transfer. A number of years ago, I had the wonderful fortune of being on the ACRO board as vice president for the admissions and enrollment management area. And one of those responsibilities was going to different state ACROs. And I was surprised by how many state ACRO organizations didn't necessarily, I think that's probably one of the reasons why we have this presentation, didn't necessarily have that many statewide type groups. And they were, and when presenting about Maryland, they were really surprised about some of the things that we did. But just to reiterate a few points that I think we all have made, brought some attention to, and mine in speaking about Maryland will make it sort of think about our group size in making sure it's manageable, and that, you know, whomever you're bringing, whether it's, you know, from your institutions or from larger associations within your state, that your group is not too large, that it's not, that you can't manage and communicate. And as John said, and to get a sense of what is working and what isn't working, and to get to see that overlap between institutions and, in my case, organizations, and to work on that standardization, because if there's anything that we all know when it comes to transfer, standardization is probably the greatest challenge when it comes to academic work and the ability and ease for transfer. We all come across student concerns, and how we address it at the 2-year or 4-year or public or private side will determine how we communicate amongst each other, whether it's in a statewide group or some other organization. And then the biggest note that I took from listening to my colleagues was, you know, we're all dealing with transfer and academic standards and many things that our transfer advisors can't deal with. And so in some of the examples I'll share, much of what we do at the state level in Maryland is to address some of the academic issues, some of the outcomes, changes in programs that our advisors can't handle. And unfortunately, our students are coming to them looking for answers, and they come together in these groups and councils. And if they don't necessarily have the ability to get the answer that they seek, then, you know, we had to figure out in Maryland where exactly were the answers going to come from. So my slides are going to sort of relate to 2 words. I'm sorry I didn't put them on here: communication and accountability. Because we want to ensure, at least in Maryland, that there's strong communication and that their people are held accountable for to the student and to the transfer student. And so the Student Transfer Advisory Council that's up on the first screen is largely, and for Maryland folks or anybody who wants to go take a peek, it's in our Code of Maryland Regulation. We've got stuff that's legislated. You just don't have a choice, and this group can't fade. This particular group is created by the Maryland Higher Education Commission, and specifically, as I read in our document, it's established for a permanent Student Transfer Advisory Council that will meet regularly to review transfer issues and recommend policy changes. And so we have this organization that is, you know, overseen at the highest level, that has representation of 13 members from across the state. My role as Director of Articulation is ex officio, but I have been affiliated with this particular council for at least about 20 years, having represented the university for the segment of larger higher ed. I'll share a link when I'm done. I've represented the segment for 4-year institutions at one point in my career. So I've been on this particular council, but the council is made of representation from advisory councils, including student, Maryland State Department of Education, the Division of Workforce Development, career colleges, We have some Maryland public institutions that are not a part of the University System of Maryland. So we've got representation, as well as the community colleges. So we have representation from all segments. So we could be, so one of the wonderful parts about this is we've got everyone at the table discussing everything from general education and changes, math or English, or all of, the base foundation for all of our programs. But then you also have something that could be related to, for instance, the career colleges may have absolutely no need to know, but at least they're at the table. So you've got, for me, I believe it's a challenge to sort of approach all of the interests that may address this particular group, but this is the only place where you have academic and non-academic segments that are dealing with student transfer issues. And recently, we submitted change to Maryland Code of Regulation related to dual enrollment. So we have that representation from the State Department of Education so that we can make certain that our policies are not becoming barriers to students coming into any of our institutions. Because for those that may not know, we've got some pretty generous transfer admission policies in Maryland that unfortunately were becoming barriers. So we created a new definition for a dual enrollment type student so that the policies that we have in place are not barriers. And this particular policy change came up through this committee. So again, a pro, you've got everyone at the table, everyone is communicating, and even those students that may be at career colleges, they don't necessarily have a pathway to transfer, but there are people that are at the table talking about programs that may be able to work for them in a career-focused pathway. So, statewide, we are all talking, again, the two words that really count here is communication and accountability. And we've got that oversight. And this council is charged not only with meeting regularly, but to present a report on what has occurred through each year to the Maryland legislature, updating on transfer issues and concerns. But if you want to sort of come down, and I'll hit the next slide to funnel just a little bit specifically with USM and sort of explaining for folks that don't know the structure. In the University System of Maryland are 12 public degree granting institutions and 3 higher education centers that make up the USM. And we have everything from comprehensive to research to historically Black institutions. And we have this fantastic relationship with the Maryland Association of Community Colleges. Now, we provide oversight, and when I say oversight, we're like behind the velvet rope at the club when it comes to the institutions. We sort of make certain that they adhere to policy. We get all of their complaints and concerns, but we have presidents that oversee each institution. The Association of Community Colleges is largely an association, but don't necessarily provide specific and direct oversight to the community colleges. But we have this wonderful relationship that has really grown over the years. Recently, excuse me, we've had a new provost council created, but I'm going to sort of back up a little bit and say, and give a little bit of history, where the USM and the Community Colleges Association had a committee of presidents that met regularly. There was a subcommittee, affectionately I would call it TNA, but we all know that the TNA is for transfer and articulation. I don't think anyone would have thought the TNA would have been for anything else. But that group met relatively regularly, but didn't necessarily have much teeth behind it. We had sort of this parallel functioning, and we coexisted. We had the presidents that met. We also had a subcommittee that included presidents and provosts. And then we had these faculty discipline groups that met largely to address transfer issues, but didn't really have the teeth to address transfer issues. And if you sort of remember back when, I made a comment about, we've got to communicate and accountability, and largely our transfer advisors are helping our transfer students. But if you think about what some of the specifics are of those challenges your students may be having, if a course isn't transferring, your transfer advisor can't look at that class and really determine if the outcomes of that class are going to meet from the community college are going to meet the four-year institution, or understand where there may be specifics changing in, and this is actually happening, accounting classes that may alter what is taught in those classes. That's not fair to our transfer advisors to make those decisions when it really is a faculty, that they own that information, that's within their wheelhouse. So what our USM and MAC presidents decided was they needed to create a provost transfer council. The provost transfer council is made up of 4 provosts from 2-year public and 4-year public institutions. And they provide direct charges to faculty discipline groups to then address specific academic course issues that have created barriers related to transfer. And to address some of these swirling issues that we may have had for years. We've had issues related to what's taught in the 102 in English, or whether or not, what should be taught in the math coursework. And some institutions teach one thing and some teach another. And so we take this specifically to the faculty, and then the provost, can nudge and ask for specific information to get to some answers, because those, again, are questions our advisors can't answer. And we found that over the years, we weren't necessarily solving these problems. We were patching them up, duct tape and chewing gum, and moving them through. So by giving us an organization at not just a statewide level, but with a solid academic base and leadership support, we have strong support from our presidents, and our presidents want to be informed what's going on at this level so that we don't continue to have these swirling issues across institutions. It really just became, I hate to say monotonous, but it was sort of this hamster on a habit wheel. We're bringing students through, we're hearing some of the same issues, we're sort of patchworking it through, making accommodations work, but we still have these classes on our catalogs, we still have unresolved issues. Faculty discipline groups we've had for years, but what we've done is we've given a little bit more teeth and oversight to some. That we have a statewide math group that addresses not just the courses in our gen ed for our institutions, but also ensuring that the high schools are well aware of what's expected, so students are prepared in transition to get to our institutions, as well as English. We have our statewide English. We also have our AAT, our Associate of Arts in Teaching oversight, which now has a little bit more support with the Provost Transfer Council, because we had a number of standard swirling issues that we just could not resolve. But with the provost oversight, it can't, it can't linger. We've only had this council, I guess, a little before the pandemic. I don't anticipate issues with meetings, although I think the pandemic may have actually helped with people be more aware of their calendars and the need to communicate and get together. And we also do have one thing we have as a statewide, most of us, just about all of us, have statewide databases with regard to transfer. And we anticipate that this greater accountability and communication with, not just the statewide groups, but having the participation and oversight of leadership will ensure that the information that our students are getting has greater oversight, and that faculty will step up to do what they need to do, because they can't hide behind, oh, I didn't know, or they didn't tell me. There's this, we're all in accountability. I got a last 10 minutes, so which means I've taken up my time, but just closing. A couple of things that I want to say is, one thing I know that many of us have issues with is when you have people sitting on groups that when they leave or retire, you don't necessarily get someone to fill in. But when you've got accountability and leadership, we don't have gaping holes. We don't have people disappearing. We have people that want to participate, so that their institution is not called out at meetings with their colleagues. The presidents don't like to be called out when their institutions aren't serving properly. So we have buy-in, we have accountability, there's less finger pointing, we're all at the table together. and we can get closure on these issues that have swirled across the state, and we're all sort of buy in together. So I'll leave it at that, and thank you for listening.
Thank you, Kristen and Tracy. So yeah, the remaining time, just want to have conversations with you all. I think if you have any questions for us individually, but also I think it'd be good to know is if you all are interested in creating a group yourself, what are those barriers that you're facing? Maybe we've had some experiences helping with that. Be it if it's a more formalized chartered entity like Tracy has a lot of experience with, or me more recently, we're just getting a group together, more grassroots approach. Really interested in seeing what you all are facing. And we don't have a huge group. If you wanted to unmute or throw it in chat, whatever you're comfortable with, happy to answer questions.
I'm gonna go for a question. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. So I'm in Indiana, and we have what's called the Indiana Transfer Council. And we started this council, I forget the exact year, but it was when we started our transfer pathways to our institutions by state policy. And so we created the group to have conversation across the state about it. And then it kind of died down, and we've restarted again. But I was interested in hearing on ways that you promoted your organization to get membership.
I mean, I think for us with our statewide group, it's more the one that, you know, is the transfer coordinator statewide group. I don't know. I feel like that one's more just like there's an expectation that you're going to have somebody from your campus that shows up at that meeting. And it's almost like, you know, we have that ingrained in us because it's been around for a while, where it's like, well, you want to have a representative go there because there is stuff that's talked about that needs to come back to campus and brought up. But I think also just, I mean, every campus is different. Every institution is different with what priorities might be from up above. And I mean, I think just if there's an issue with getting time out of the office or being able like to step out for a day-long meeting or something, I think it's, you know, whatever you can do to get others to see the importance of what you're doing, and how that has an impact on your enrollment, you know, for helping transfer students. And then, like I said, with our Illinois ACAC group, we just try and make it more, you know, we try and recruit like from a social aspect, you know, have a social gathering, and this is what we do, and, you know, why we think it's fun and important, and hopefully recruit people that way.
For the transfer provost council, the letters came from the presidents. And for the faculty representation, the invite or the request for the faculty comes from the provost. Previously, for our faculty discipline groups, they were sort of self-appointed. Do you want to be a part? I'd hunt people down, go through catalogs, find out who's the chair of the department.
Mm-hmm.
I also want to note that on our faculty discipline groups, they are co-chaired by 2-year and 4-year faculty. So there's representation and leadership on those councils by both 2-year and 4-year faculty. But the provosts are president appointed, and the faculty are provost appointed.
I'll say really briefly that for the UC-TC group, what was really helpful is the beginning of, I worked primarily with leadership first at the each of the UC campuses. And so that right off the bat, well, if you can get the leadership buy-in, then it's a lot better way to start off with that. You typically want your experts in these groups, absolutely. But starting with leadership, I think is really great. And I also want to double down on the importance of scope and defining what your group is to do. Because we all know what's important to us. The group should really speak for itself almost, really, because people should want to participate. I saw someone in the chat even was like, hey, can I join your group, right? And that's the best thing. It's the biggest thing I hope other people feel is that I'm just some random person, to be very honest, in the UC group, and the whole UC group didn't have a group for what we needed for. I just was the first one to bring it up. So I bet the more you talk about it and socialize the concept and what the purpose is, it almost will kind of do the work for you to some extent. But I hear you as far as like, how do you still want to actively engage and pull those folks in? That's a great question. And I think there's another question maybe for Tracy, I think it was, for statewide groups and Kristen.
It looks like there's a couple of things going on in the chat. So Tracy dropped in a link to Steve's earlier request. And then Cheryl says, I'm in the process of making a case for a statewide transfer group in my state. I'm going to be presenting on the need for one at our first statewide transfer student success conference in October. Any resources, tips, and ideas for what I should include would be very much appreciated.
I mean, I think it goes back to just really showing why there's a need for it, you know, building the case for the need and why it's a productive use of time. And if you have colleagues to join you, I mean, you know, don't just go it alone. I think John talked a lot about that, where you really kind of need some others from other part of your state to kind of join forces so that you can make it happen together. So I think that'd be some of my advice.
The only one little piece of advice I might add is, in retrospect, think about how you survived the pandemic and what was communication like, where were your shortcomings, where do you wish you would have come together more, and you know, can you find an argument for improved communication and accountability to your students? You know, if you made it through that, then how? You know, and take what you did through the pandemic as sort of, you know, your framework and litmus test on moving forward. Because I think we all there was a whole lot of MacGyvering going on when it came to transfer communication and transcripts and how do we do this and how do we account for that, and so, you know, where you think you may have had your shortcomings over the past, you know, year or so, however you had to be away, think about how that could be improved moving forward, because we had group things that worked together, but worked well, but I think we found ways to improve as a result of the pandemic.
One thing I think that a lot of people are talking about is transfer credit, which obviously is the foremost importance for a lot of students. But I'm going to make my pitch for professional development. That's one of the things that I do with the Indiana Transfer Council, is that the opportunities like this summit, I'm posting on our website to get more involvement across the board and more information out there. So yes, talk about transfer credit, but also there's a lot of other things that evolve around transfer that your state constituents would be in the know about then, and have those conversations and those listservs.
Thanks, it's great.
Any other questions or thoughts before we go ahead and close this out? Okay, well, thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you to our presenters, John, Kristen, and Stacy, and to all of you for joining us today at this session. I dropped in the link for the main agenda in the chat. So if you have any questions about how to navigate to further sessions today, please feel free to click on that. And with that, have a great rest of your afternoon and enjoy the rest of your summit. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone. Take care. Thanks for joining.